this is actually a this is actually going to be a chapter in my upcoming dissertation. So I'm currently writing my dissertation. I'm going to have a chapter on critical cartography. So the title of my chapter is going to be called Transformations in Anishinaabe Kendaaswin. So Kendaaswin in Anishinaabe means knowledge, interactive mapping. So this is a map of the nations, the groups of people who speak Anishinaabe. You could actually find this map on Wikipedia if you Google the Anishinaabe peoples. And right in the center around Lake Huron in the lime green, we have who would be the Odawa peoples. And to the south of them in the yellow, which would be south of Lake Michigan, would be the Potawatomi peoples. And then to the north in the purple around Lake Superior would be the Ojibwe peoples. And to the west of them in the red are the Soto. And to the north in the orange are the Oji Cree. They speak a dialect that is a hybrid language of Ojibwe mixed with the Cree language from the north. And as we go to the east in the small purple there, we have the Nipissing peoples. And in the dark green, we have the Algonquins. And to the southeast and southeast Ontario, we have the Mississaugas. So all of these groups speak Anishinaabe. They do have different dialects, but all of these groups could understand each other, and they encompass the Anishinaabe Nation or the Three Fires Confederacy. And this is how the groups of people. This is the geographic locations at the time of colonization when the French arrived. So in my presentation, I'm going to be showing how our sacred stories, oral history, and our community-based knowledges are all intertied using the Anishinaabe language. So how we say sacred stories in Anishinaabe is Odsokan, and the oral history is our Dabajimoin. And our community-based knowledge is our spiritual, is a word called Mimgwenzawin. It's kind of like our spiritual gifts that when we come into this world, everybody is born with a unique gift that we all excel at, that we're all good at something. And when people in the communities excel at their gifts, their knowledge through their lifetime becomes community-based knowledge. And how Odzokan is connected with the Bajimowin is a word called that we say on sokan. These are the oral teachings that can be changed or added on to impart a lesson. In Odzokan, they teach what values are important to the Anishinaabe people, but they must maintain its original form. And the Bajimowin is the oral history. It provides multiple perspectives on historical events. And the Mimgwenzawin, or our personal knowledge, are contemporary perspectives, and they're connected with the Bajimowin by community-based knowledge. Personal perspectives are valued, and it is connected with Odsokan through our spiritual knowledge. And all three of these are interconnected together. They offer an Anishinaabe perspective. They provide continuity, sharing knowledge from one generation to the next. Debunks Eurocentric perspectives on history. It honors our oral tradition, and it values the storyteller, and it builds relationships. So Anishinaabe knowledge and colonial mapping. Places on maps are also considered places of history. Each geographic space or region has had historical events that have taken place which define the area. This is also known as spatial history. So Indigenous peoples, when we looked at our oral history, when we actually look at history, it's not emphasized so much on the linear time, but it's more on certain events that took place in specific geographic spaces. So we documented these events, whether it was on birch bark scrolls or pictographs or petroglyphs, and through our place naming, but and we actually named some sacred landscapes depending on some significant event that happened in a specific geographic space. So this is also known as spatial history. Early colonial maps used indigenous knowledge to create the maps and identified some place names. But by the mid 18th century, indigenous place names began to disappear. So the original maps when the French first arrived in the early 17th century, well, the later 16th century, early 17th century, when they started to make these first maps, what they would do was the explorers and the Jesuits, they would travel with indigenous guides who would take them out onto the landscape, and they were identifying the landscapes and the place names. So these early cartographic information was based on indigenous knowledge. And some of the very first early maps were in indigenous languages, and later on they become what I would call or define a hybridized indigenous language with the French, or specifically Anishinaabe one with French. And this is just an example of an activity for some communities who do not have digital mapping, access to digital mapping. This is a map that I made of the Anishinaabe migration. It shows that prior to European colonization, that the Anishinaabe peoples migrated west from the East Coast, and they had 7 sacred stopping places. So this is just a map identifying of the Anishinaabe migration. So when I first began my research, I was looking for a dissertation topic in September 2017. And back home where I'm from, on Manitowabi Island in the North Shore of Lake Huron, in the center of the Great Lakes, there is this myth. So if you Google Manitowabi Island history, you'll find on the internet that there is this myth or this misconception that the Anishinaabe had burned Manitowabi Island, and they had abandoned it for 150 years, and that they did not return until 1836, and that this fire took place sometime in the 17th century. But according to my oral tradition and the oral traditions in my community, that was not the case. The island was never abandoned. There are always people living on the island. There are always Odawa, Anishinaabe people who resided on the island. We do acknowledge that there was a great fire at one time. There's various sources of specifically how the fire had started. Some people say it started as natural causes. Others say that the indigenous people, the Anishinaabe, wanted to cleanse the island of an evil spirit. The whole island did not burn, and all of the families did not leave. There were some families who went to Mishlamacana, and there was a major Odawa village there in the 18th century around what is today Mackinac City, the St. Ignace, Michigan area. But some families did stay on Manitowabi Island, and one of the clans, the family clans that stayed on Manitowabi Island, was the Amik, the Amikwa. They're also known as the Beaver clan. So how we say Beaver in Anishinaabe is Amik. So when I first came across this map in this map is from 1744, middle of the 18th century. When I first came across this map in the early fall of 2017, this is the first colonial map that I was looking at. There's a phrase at the bottom of Manitoulin. It says, so it says the island of Manitoulin, and it says Le Amiku habitant cette isle. So when I first looked, I myself personally cannot read French very well. I cannot pronounce French very well. But when I showed this map to a French speaker, I asked them what this phrase says, and they could not recognize the word that starts with the A. They said that these people live on this island, or this island belongs to these people. And because I was raised in the Anishinaabe language, both of my parents are fluent in the language, I recognized that word right away. And it says Amikku. So it says the Amikku are the habitants of this island. They live on this island. And right away, I recognized that word, Mik, which means the beaver, which refers to the Beaver Clan people. So the name of my community is Wikwe Mikhong. So Wikwe is Wikwe Da means the bay. Wikwe Amik is the beaver. So Wikwe Amikong is the home of the Beaver Clan people. So it refers to at a time when the Beaver Clan people were living on the eastern end of Manitowabi Island. So this map is in 1744. So when I was thinking about that myth of the Great Fire, that the island was burned and it was abandoned and nobody was living on it, it was the first clue that I had come across that there were people living, Anishinaabe people living on the island in the mid 18th century. This is one of the very first maps that was created. This is the Brazoni Map of 1657. It shows it's all in Latin. Some of the place names here are indigenous languages. It shows the indigenous villages at the time, so which would have been in 1657. And as we can see on these little symbols there, it'll show where there was a major indigenous village. It looks like a little dwelling or a little wigwam or a little kind of looks like a teepee. So right on Manitowabi Island, we see the word EK210 and it says POP, which I assume means population. EK210 is a Wendat word that actually, it's a Wendat word that means Manitoulin. So the Wendat lived on the south, which would have been south of Georgian Bay, which would have been in Wendake, Huronia, which is around Midland, Ontario today. So they called Manitowabi Island EK-Tuton, and it actually means in the Wendat language, it refers to that big shore on the southern end of Manitoulin, the southern shore, that a lot of debris washes up on the island. And as we can also see in to the west, where present-day Sault Ste. Marie is, we do see some dwellings there, and it says that there is a significant population of indigenous people there. And as we look at this map, it is very accurate, as the previous map was. It shows the island very accurate. It's pretty accurate for a 17th century map of 17th century cartography. This is the Samson Map of 1656. These are all in indigenous names. When I did ask a Tuscarora elder what language this was, it's not Anishinaabe, but it is an Iroquoian language, and he was telling me that this map is in Wendat. It's in the Wendat language. So the French were doing we're amongst the Huron, the Wendat people during the early 17th century, and he said that this map is in the Wendat language, and it would be very difficult to translate this map today. I have not met any fluent Wendat speakers, and I do not know if any Wendat linguists would be able to translate this map. But the elder had told me that it might be next to impossible to ever get this map translated. But I just wanted to show this map because it shows that these early maps were in fact in indigenous languages, these first place names, these first maps. And on Manitowabi Island, we see a French word that says Chavou Relvis. It's hard for me to pronounce that, but in French, it means the raised hair or the standing hairs. So when the French first met the Odawa in July of 1615 at the mouth of the French River, the Odawa men they were had their hairs standing straight up. And that was the name that the French had called the Odawa, was the raised hairs. This is a map of Ontario in 1805. And as we can see, if we zoom in on Manitoulin Island, Manitoulin Island is kind of disfigured. So it's not as accurate as those earlier maps, the first maps that were created. And at this time, all of the place names are changed into English in the 19th century. And from colonization through the power of maps, they would try and make the island as if it was empty, as if there's nobody living there. So it kind of looks like it's distorted, that it's not very accurate as those first maps. So the earlier maps are Manitoulin's very accurate, but this map shows that it's very inaccurate when we look at Manitoulin Island. So I was trying to wonder why, and I was thinking maybe the cartographers at this time used the power of maps to kind of make it look like it was an empty landscape, using terra nullius, that the island was empty and it was abandoned, and they didn't really know what the island had looked like at this time. This is modern Manitoulin Island. I just wanted to show you how accurate how Manitoulin Island really looks. That's in the north shore of Lake Huron. And this is an example of a De-Colonial Map. So this is from the De-Colonial Atlas that is made by Charles Lippard. You could find this online on the De-Colonial Atlas. So what it is it's the Great Lakes in the Anishinaabe language, and it's actually having the eastern part is actually facing north. And as we can see, we do have Manitoulin Island is called Odawa Minis, so which would have been the original name of Manitoulin. It was also known as Nidom Nising by the Ojibwe, and the Odawa called it Odawa Minis. It was the original homelands of the Odawa people. And also in the center there, we could barely see it, but it says Weweb Juang, which actually means the current. The water flows back and forth and it never freezes there. So that's the word for the town of Little Current, which is on the north side of Manitoulin Island. And I just wanted to show this map to give an example of how some Indigenous researchers today are using counter mapping or making decolonial maps. This one's all in the Anishinaabe language, changing the place names back into Anishinaabe, trying to find who were the original groups and communities, the place names of the communities prior to European colonization. And this is a very good example. Lake Huron is called Nainoa Chigaming. So Chigaming is the big water. Chi means big. So Chigaming is the big water. Nainoa is the word, the Anishinaabe word for the Iroquoian people. So that would be referring to the Huron people. So that's when Lake Huron. Lake Superior is called Anishinaabe Chigaming, which is the Great Lake of the Ojibwe or the Great Lake of the Anishinaabe. We do have other place names on here where I don't know if people know where Rama, Ontario is. There's a word there that we could see on the north center part of this island, which would be the east around Lake Simcoe. There's a place there called Majikaning, which is the Rama First Nation. So Majikaning in Anishinaabe means fish fence. So it's referring to the narrows between Lake Couchiching and Lake Simcoe. There's a fish fence that's still in the water there today. You can still see it. It's very visible today, and it's about 5,000 years old. But it's the way how the native people there used to harvest their fish. They would make the fish fence, and when the fish would come in and spawn in Lake Couchiching, they would trap the fish there, so they would not be able to go into the other lake, into Lake Simcoe. So that's the original name of their community. They are known as Rama First Nation, but their original name was actually Majikning, which means fish fence. I'm not going to go through this whole map, but I just wanted to show you an example of how some people are using making de-colonial maps using Anishinaabe Moan. So what I'm going to be doing for my dissertation is I'm going to be creating a de-colonial map for Manitowabi Island for the Lake Huron area, maybe northern Michigan, but the original homelands of the Odawa people, of Odawa Minis. What I want to do is I want to create a digital map that's going to be Anishinaabe Moan, but I want to indicate the stories of the place names. So how the places got their name through oral history. So documenting the oral history with the stories back to the geographic locations. And this is a map that was made in the 1950s. It's all in the Ojibwe language, Anishinaabe Moan of Odawa Minis. As we can see on the eastern part of Manitowabi Island, it says Wikwe Mekong, which is the bay of the Beaver, the Bay of the Beaver Clan people. That is my home community on the eastern end of Manitoulin. I'm not going to go through this whole map, but I just wanted to show some examples of how I'm going to be pursuing my further research by creating creating a de-colonial map. As we see on the very southeast of the map there, it says Bejigoji Minising. Bejigoji is a horse, so it means Horse Island. But actually the story of that island is there was a shipwreck there at one time that had taken place in the early 19th century, and everybody had perished on the ship except for a horse. So there was a horse that was running around on the island, living there by himself. So the Anishinaabe started to call that island Horse Island. And the reason why I bring up this example is because it's a very interesting story, even though we have an Anishinaabe word for the island. So the island today is named Fitzwilliam Island. But the Anishinaabe people in my community, we call it Bejigoji Minising, which is Horse Island. But when I think about that story, I think about that story happened in the early 19th century from a shipwreck. And I thought about it more. I was like, what was the island called before? What was it called before European colonization? So we do see where colonization intersects with the Anishinaabe oral histories and the mapping. This is a good example, because if we think about this island, this small little island there, what was its name before Europeans arrived? And I did find out that it means Minisensing. So Minis means the island. When you make something smaller, diminutive, Minisensing means the smaller island. So it means the island, but the smaller island. So Minisensing means the smaller island at the back or behind, kind of. So they would be referring to the southeast shore there of Manitoulin, and then there's a smaller island behind that shore. That's what actually that word means. It just means the smaller island that's at the back. So Nisocking would mean, that's how you would say at the back, or something that's behind. So Minisensing is the word for the little island that's at the back. So that's the original name of that island, and that's what I found out. And there's a little bay there, which is Salt Bay, but the word is, our original name was the Deweguning, which is our name for the drum is Dewe Gun. So we called it Dewe Gungining, the place of the drums. And the reason why we called it the place of the drums is at one time we cannot practice our ceremonies in our spiritual knowledge, so we had to go hide in the bush And that's how we kept our language and our traditions alive. We would go hide in the bush to practice our ceremonies. So that's why that place is called Dewe Gunganing. And as time passed on, people just say it faster, and it says it's pronounced Doganing, but it actually comes from the word Dewe Gun, which is the drum. So Dewe Gunganing. I'm not going to go through this whole map, but I wanted to show that these places are all in Anishinaabe. And this is my starting tool to create my my digital map. And I just wanted to provide this example. This map comes from the Seneca Nation in Western New York. What they did was they have a place in the 1960s when they built the Kinswa Dam, which is the dam that powers up the city of Pittsburgh. They flooded the lands of the Seneca Nation in Western New York. And before they flooded the lands, there was a community all along the Allegheny River. And there's a picture of a store there, this trading post, and we see the pictures of the houses and a church that actually, there used to be an actual community there in the 1930s, the 1940s, and the 1950s, and they flooded all the land. So they relocated all the Seneca up the river, and they moved them to a town called Salamanca today. But in the 1930s and 1940s, there was an actual village there along the Allegheny River. So now they flood all of that land. So what they did was they created these story maps of documenting along the river. So this is a picture of a digital map. So in the purple there, it shows on the right-hand side there, the purple, it shows where the land is when it's flooded, and then we see all the red. Those are those houses and the church that was down there. And then this is a picture of when you click on the map and you zoom in, it will show the yellow. So inside the yellow is the original river, where the original river was before the flood. So in between the purple and the yellow would be where the village, where the people lived, where they resided, where the houses and the church and their community was. So this is how they use the digital tools to tell their story of their flood in their homelands. And I just wanted to show this example of how some Indigenous communities are using the digital tools today to document oral history.
Excuse me to interrupt. Oh, look at that. This is perfect timing.
Yes, and that is the end of my presentation.
Thank you very much, George. Sorry for interrupting you at the end. Thank you very much. So if you have questions for Josh, please post them in the Q&A box, and then we'll get back to those questions at the end of the panel. We can now move on to our second presenter, who is Christine Luckasavitch.
Everybody can hear me okay? Yeah?
Very well.
Kwaya ni bosho, Christine Adishna Kas, Madawaski Sipian Donchiba, Ajija Kendodam, Mama Winanish, Nabe Kwendao. Hi everyone, my name is Christine. I am from the Crane clan. I am from the Madawaska River Algonquin people. And I am joining you today from my ancestral homeland in the area that's now known as Algonquin Park in Ontario. As mentioned before, I am the executive director of Native Land Digital, which is the capacity that I'm joining you in today. I'm also the owner of 2 small Indigenous knowledge-based companies, Wasaya Consulting, Wasaya Cultural Tours, and a master's student in Indigenous Studies at Trent University. So what stories can maps tell if we let them? Cartographies are visual stories and representations of familial and nation territories, the locations of our portages, seasonal living places. So what might Indigenous understandings of land look like in cartographic practice? How do we step beyond theorizing to establishing meaningful collaborations with Indigenous communities? Maps have the power to change our understandings of place. If we deepen our understandings of place, and if we create, engage, and foster in good relationships with land and Indigenous beings of that land, our perceptions and understandings can be altered. We can then have the ability to enter into reciprocal relationships with humans and other than human beings. Those relationships can also help us to create maps that can be a tool to help us visualize a deeper understanding and appreciation for the stories in those territories. Further, maps can become a tool to change our shared history into one that creates a vibrant, safe, and intact future for next generations. So native-land.ca is a totally free, open source digital tool that allows users to visualize lands, languages, and treaty boundaries on a global scale. Native-land.ca is known for the colorful tapestry of Indigenous lands, languages, and treaty boundaries in a global scale. As an Indigenous-led Canadian nonprofit organization, Native Land Digital encourages our users to engage critically with maps depicting colonial boundaries. So instead of focusing on colonial boundaries, we focus instead on increasing awareness and knowledge about Indigenous cultures and territories by challenging concepts linked to settler colonialism. Native Land Digital is taking steps to increase Indigenous sovereignty over our data and over our knowledge and offer space for Indigenous nation and tribal representation on their own terms. We are governed by a mostly Indigenous board of directors, an advisory council of experts in Indigenous cartographies, and our day-to-day operations are carried out by an all Indigenous staff. We continue to be supported by Victor Temprano, founder of Native Land, and also a non-Indigenous person. I will mention that this was the very first map that he created while he was engaged in anti-pipeline activism in 2014-2015. He began to consider ways that he can encourage greater awareness of much deeper and longer histories of the land that we're on, rather than the short and often inaccurate colonial histories we're arguably too familiar with. So here we are today. This paper or this presentation will demonstrate the power of representation, of creating space for Indigenous stories, particularly through cartographies, as well as the dangers associated with colonial expansion aided by maps that attempted to erase our presence on our home territories. So this is a screenshot from the map itself, and in the center of the map, you will see that it highlights Omamuniniweg or Algonquin or Anishinaabe. So this screenshot of the map demonstrates kind of the familiar site that you will see when you visit. It shows overlapping territories in a number of different colors, but it also represents the complexities of Indigenous relationship with land and neighboring territories. And as I mentioned, Algonquin territory being found on the center of the map, you can see that we have relations, and giving a shout out to Josh, who had just presented. So we speak similar languages, so we're part of the same related group of people. When you visit the Native Land map, you are greeted by a disclaimer. And this disclaimer states that we don't intend to represent any legal or official boundaries, or any definitive boundaries, really, but rather we encourage people to engage deeper with the map and understand that there are many other stories to be told rather than what's presented at face value here. We also ask people to reach out to us if there are any fixes or errors that might be necessary. Our work is entirely based on our relationships with Indigenous communities and nations. Indigenous knowledge is prioritized, and that's why you do not see colonial boundaries on our map. We do not represent one particular point in time either, but rather a long period of time that changes and so on. And our map is actually constantly changing depending on the feedback and such that we get from community. We do fully acknowledge that our map is very much a starting point for learning, and we actually encourage people, if they want to learn more, to engage directly with Indigenous nations where they are. So for this story, I'm going to actually share some of my own experiences to show you the sort of power and the impact of maps, both positive and negative. So archaeological evidence puts the earliest ancestors of the Algonquin people in the area, now known as the Ottawa River Basin, including territory now known as Ontario and Quebec, for at least 12,000 years, though our oral traditions state that we've been here since time immemorial. The Algonquin landscape is one of sacred and rugged beauty. As it is known today, the traditional territory of the Algonquin people is delineated by the boundaries of the Ottawa River watershed, which is what you see in this map. The Algonquin nation is generally broken into many bands whose familial territories were divided by rivers, and even today the names of those rivers are often reminiscent of the ancestral people of that river. We are intrinsically connected to land. The character of our territory is shaped who we are as a people. So this is a photo that I actually added in today for our first snowfall here. And this is a scene from where I live. It's actually the same place that my Algonquin grandmother was born in the 1930s, and that I'm lucky to still live on today. And so this is a shot of the Madawaska River. And one of the main tributaries of the Ottawa River is the Madawaska, which begins in what is now present-day Algonquin Park. The Madawaska River and its tributaries is home to the Madawaska people, or the people of the Shallows, and I belong to this group of people. So Algonquin people, as with all Indigenous people across Turtle Island, now known as North America, had developed an extremely complex range of values, beliefs, spiritual practices, languages, sophisticated trade networks, legal systems, and governance structures over thousands of years. We live with the land and adapting our life ways with the seasons, and migrating animals. So even to this day, we understand that we are just a small part of this creation, and that there's no superiority associated with belonging to the human race. However, with almost every indigenous nation in the world, Algonquin peoples continue to be deeply impacted by settler colonialism. So this is a map of Algonquin Nation territory around 1850 to 1867. To quote Peter de Ganji, the traditional territory of the Algonquin people has always included the Ottawa Valley and adjacent lands straddling the border between what is now known as Quebec and Ontario. Unlike most of Ontario and the prairies, Algonquin territory has never been dealt with by land sharing treaty. Algonquin title continues to exist. So what we can see here is that Algonquin territory has been divided by colonial boundaries, particularly those provincial boundaries. And I will also say that ancestral boundaries and imaginary lines were drawn across rivers, cities, and towns, and places were settled, including the city of Ottawa, which is now the capital of Canada, in the heart of Algonquin territory. So with this map, you can see colonial laws were forced upon us. It also meant that with settlement and colonial presence in Algonquin territory, we were given the option to move to, especially in Ontario, we were given the opportunity to move to the one Algonquin Reserve or stay in our homelands, the places that we had been and our families had been for thousands of years. But in staying in those places, our identity and belonging remains deeply impacted. So this, as mentioned, this paper focuses on Madawaska Algonquin territory, specifically the headwaters area. This is the area that my family has cared for since time immemorial. Until the first timber licenses were issued in this area around the 1830s, the land at the headwaters of the Madawaska River was genuinely untouched by Europeans, save for a few surveyors trying to find a navigable waterway between what was known as the Ottawa River and Georgian Bay. They chose not to use the Madawaska or Petawawa rivers due to the heights of land and the number of rapids encountered. So following the first timber licenses, within almost 70 years, almost every tree was wiped off the landscape, and home and habitats of many plants and animals were decimated. The province of Ontario's reaction was to create an area that could be managed. And so in 1893, Algonquin National Park was created. This is a wilderness space that is a Canadian icon and significant to Canadian identity as a whole. As stated by Eva Mackey, the concept of Canada as a northern wilderness remains constant in the Canadian nationalist or settler colonial mythology and serves as a symbol for Canadian identity. And according to John Samlos, Canadians have regarded nature as hostile and dangerous, a malevolent force that should be domesticated and controlled by colonial governments. This means to be managed as a wilderness space. So according to the Ontario government, New park boundaries were put in place to help to manage a large wilderness space and allow for responsible system of resource extraction, specifically timber. So though this area was named Algonquin National Park because there was not at that time a provincial park system, it was eventually renamed to Algonquin Provincial Park. But specifically looking at this, wanting to discuss where does that term Algonquin fit in? While it certainly covers some of our homelands, it does not actually include us. So ironically, when it was being named, it was suggested that it be called the Algonquin Park, in this way perpetuating the memory of one of the greatest Indian nations that inhabited the North American continent. They included the Nipissings, Ottawa, Montagnais, Delaware, Wendat, and Mississaugas, and over 30 different tribes. So here, though they are referring to Indigenous peoples who include this in part of their ancestral territory, they spoke about us in past tense, making it seem as though we're no longer there. But they also deliberately left out mentioning Algonquin people who were at this point in time still living within these new boundaries. So I would state then, through this sort of mapping exercise and when these colonial boundaries are drawn, the Ontario government went through efforts to create a map that essentially wipes us off. So essentially, we were deliberately ignored, and our presence in our territory was thought to be kind of taken care of when we were forced to move outside of these Algonquin Park boundaries. So according to Veracini and the imagined geographies of settler colonialism, Indigenous peoples, their survival, resistance, sovereignty, and grievances were inevitably considered as temporary, marginal, and by and large unsuitable for the historical narratives of nationalizing settler policy. I would argue that the government thought that perhaps we as Indigenous people were temporary on this land and that we were sort of being taken care of by that vanishing Indian myth. When boundaries are drawn, they did not ask us perhaps what it might mean to us to have these boundaries now in our homelands, or perhaps what we wanted or where we wanted to continue to live. They also did not ask us if we wanted to leave, but rather forced us to do so. And then also just to mention, I want to honor Dr. Zoe Todd's work in stating, like, though the government didn't ask us, they also didn't ask the other beings who were here. They didn't ask what the plants or what the animals may have thought about these new boundaries and really how they would be impacted or perhaps remain safe in a provincial park system, or did they even want a park system to begin with? So this photo is my Algonquin family, dated from the late 1800s. So settler colonialism dispossesses Indigenous people not only of land, but specifically of places holding land together. The disconnection from land and displacement has a profound effect on people in terms of our ability to sustain ourselves physically, culturally, and mentally as Indigenous peoples, to also to borrow from Alfred and Larson and Johnson. When we were removed from our territories, our relationships with place and with each other, including languages, ceremony, and connection to spiritual places, was interrupted. For years, we knew that we were facing our own apocalypse. So the first Algonquin petition to the Crown for the preservation of integrity of Algonquin territory was in 1772, and those petitions still continue to this day, many being unanswered. I am a direct descendant of the Grand High Chief of Algonquin Nipissing people, and able to trace his name and other members of my family through archival records and petitions sent to the Crown. My grandfather generation ago worked very hard to have reserved land set aside in what is now known as Algonquin Park. Government correspondence shows that essentially the government wasn't really too keen on setting aside this type of land in a place that serves as a Canadian wilderness icon. And the quote that I've included on this photo states that the township of Lawrence is situated upon the confines of Algonquin National Park, which, as you know, was reserved as a home for game of all descriptions. The intention being to preserve the beauty of the park and afford a harbor for the different wild animals, birds, etc., which are natives of this province. The formation of a settlement of Indians on the borders of a territory of this kind would, in my opinion, be attended with great danger to the preservation of game in the park. You know the predatory habits of these people, how they roam about, and how difficult it is to keep watch of their movements in the forest. The creation of Algonquin Park meant that we became illegal in our own homes. We were forced from the land that we have called home since time immemorial. We were no longer able to legally harvest our food within the new boundaries created by Algonquin Park. And essentially, my Algonquin family experienced a loss of community space. Though we were able to make a home in the settler town of Whitney, which borders where we had lived, which was now inside Algonquin Park. And we were forced to kind of sink into a point in time in what I've heard elders refer to as sleeping generations. The impact of our dispossession continues years and years later. And using the creation of Algonquin Park to show sort of what it means to be wiped off of a landscape, or at least someone attempting to wipe us off of a landscape. Algonquin Park became, as I had mentioned, a wilderness icon in Ontario's crown jewel park. Summer camps and fishing resorts, as well as just major tourism destinations, railroads, continued resource extraction, and so on, as well as an eventual highway, campsites, interior campsites, and so on, particularly in the places that we had once called home. That's what Algonquin Park became. That is what came to the place that we had called home for so long, with the creation of these new imaginary boundaries that created this wilderness space. When you look at this map of Algonquin Park, which is from 1925, Madawaska Algonquin presence has almost been completely removed. So when you look at this map, where does it show kind of what happened to Madawaska Algonquin people? Where is our presence still represented, other than in the name, even though it wasn't actually named after us? So then further thinking, what are the stories that lay beneath the colonial labels on these maps, and how does this map and others attempt to completely erase nations from their territories? So just to quickly touch on this is a map from 1998 of Algonquin Provincial Park that shows all of the different management zones. So nature reserves, wilderness zone, historical zone, and so on. Just thinking for a moment, whose values inform these delineations? When we look at those values, what is the true value of land in North America, and how does understandings of value change when you shift your gaze from a colonialist society to Indigenous ways of knowing? How would this map change other than the labels? Do we manage it for certain uses to fit our own agendas? And further, in this map itself, which continues to be unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory, where does Algonquin presence continue to play a role? So this is a picture of my grandmother and my father. They grew up, both of them, at a time when it was illegal for us to be who we are, and when we could not practice our language, we could not practice our ceremonies, and so on. Joshua had mentioned this too, that in order to continue ceremony, we had to do it in secret. We had to go into the bush where no one could see us and no one could find us. My grandmother lived her whole life not talking about what it means to be an Algonquin woman. So this was also during like the 1920s with that dark blue map I had put up. This was during a time when our children were forcibly removed from homes, an act that still continues to this day, and sent to residential schools. It was illegal for us to vote. Cultural events were banned, including sweat lodges, full moon ceremonies, and feasts. It was illegal for us to hire a lawyer, even to raise funds with the intention of hiring a lawyer. It was illegal for us to publish as well, and to even tell these stories. So being here telling these stories is incredibly significant. When we were forcibly displaced from our ancestral homes, we were not afforded the opportunity to remain together as a community. So I mentioned before, we had the option of either staying here close to where we're from or being sent out to the closest reserve. My family chose to not go to the reserve, but to rather stay in our homelands. And because of this, we did not qualify for Indian status under the Indian Act, and most of us became non-status Algonquins by default. As a result of this displacement, we became disconnected, as I had mentioned. My great-grandmother, my grandmother's mother, and her siblings were adopted into non-Indigenous families where they were told that they were dirty Indians and should be ashamed of the blood that flows through their veins. They were taught to be ashamed and forced to hide their indigeneity. This shame found its way to my grandmother and then through to my father. But we're at a point where we're starting to refuse that sense of shame. And I'm among the first generation of my family in almost 100 years to return to at least a form of traditional practice through reconnecting with my heritage. And I am thankful that I'm now able to help my father learn a little bit more, at least about the history of where we come from and who we are as people. A lot of this kind of reconnecting with practice and it ends up being around harvesting with my dad, and he's able to teach me kind of how to do it, and I'm able to teach him a little bit more about place and where we are, and perhaps even some of the practices that go along with sustainable harvesting. So in the course of a few hundred years, our ancestral territory was greatly changed. But what is the risk when our place names are erased, when we are completely erased from land, or at least attempted to be completely erased from land? In Larson and Johnson, in their article, Pathways to Coexistence, they speak to an ability to be on the land and to know places. When you're making these maps, everything good? Okay. So when you're looking at these, making maps, you should go around in the places and actually look at the country. These places will tell you what they mean. Places are related to one another along trails and pathways that have moral genealogical significance. So we have these trails of stories that still exist through portages, and also that show the ways that we would have moved through place. It's just that they're not often presented in Indigenous cartographies, but instead, like the map that's shown now, the canoe routes of Algonquin Park, though our presence is not as visible as it perhaps should be, these canoe routes are based on our old ways of traveling through the landscape. Many of the campsites and other sorts of little settlements within our territory are based on the places that we have lived and that we have traveled since time immemorial. So currently there are still 114 Indigenous lake names that remain on the map, though this is something that's not relatively well known. And so what is the long-term impact of settler colonialism on the Algonquin nation? So as I had mentioned earlier, the nation is extremely fractured. Currently, a selection of communities in Ontario, both status and non-status, are negotiating a land claim with the Ontario and Canadian governments. However, not every Algonquin community or individual is invited to participate in this land claim. The negotiation of a land claim on unceded Algonquin territory to enable the Algonquins of Ontario or beneficiaries of that land claim to own land is a further act of colonial erasure. Those negotiating a land claim may not be completely informed that they are further entrenching half of the Algonquin nation into a colonial system under Canada's Indian Act, some of the only race-based legislation in the world. The first thing I want to point out is that as Indigenous people, we understand that we do not own the land, and we cannot own our mother. The land and all other than human beings are our relations. So how can we own our relations? So a result of disconnect from our ancestral knowledge and culture, Algonquin people are turning to a colonial system to create a new version of nationhood. And we are calling into question how we define Algonquin identity. Is it through kinship relations, or is it under colonial law and genealogical proof of who is an actual Indian and who is not? Similar to discussions in Audra Simpson's Mohawk Interrupts, Algonquins are balancing somewhere between the vanishing Indian, which we never were, and having a membership code. But if we have a membership code based on eventual extermination under the Indian Act, what will that leave us? And will we still be Algonquin? So there are communities who are experiencing a resurgence of traditional Indigenous Algonquin knowledge. We're working to bring back our languages, our ceremonies, and our relationships with each other, with the land, and with other than human beings. And we understand that we cannot own our mother. That being said, I think it's important to point out that regardless of imaginary colonial boundaries that are being superimposed on Turtle Island for the last few hundred years, as well as these potential new land claim boundaries, currently Algonquin territory remains unceded and unsurrendered. While there is currently a land claim negotiation underway, this land claim does not include all Algonquin people, therefore its legitimacy is questionable. How can a land claim be negotiated under colonial law on behalf of less than half of all Algonquin people for only 1% of our territory? So looking at land in a different way, particularly with cartographies, when we look differently, what else can we understand? What can we learn from land? How can our perceptions of land change, particularly if we're not looking at it through a capitalistic lens? What would our maps look like if we prioritize Indigenous languages and Indigenous presence and knowledge that has remained on that land since time immemorial? How might this change our personal relationships with the ancestral territories that we call home, whether or not they are our own personal ancestral territories or those which we have settled on? So wanting to show you a map that is a result of a recent collaboration between myself and Chris Brackley of As the Crow Flies Cartography. This map is for a day use trip map for Erewhon Pines, which is a resort in Algonquin Park. This map, and you can see by the different colors, highlights the seasonal changes, heights of land, waterways, and ecosystem. But most importantly, the labels on this map prioritize the knowledge that this land is Anishinaabe before it is Algonquin Park. I think, and what I love about this map is a way that we can see how the landscape changes and even which plant relations exist on that territory. If you were to look at the fall map, so the one that is in orange, you can see the different types of trees as they might appear on the landscape during the fall season. The maples and the hardwoods in the orange colors, the yellow showing the tamaracks, and the dark green showing the conifers. So this is just an enhanced version of this map. So as I mentioned, through a bit of a nuanced approach, the labels in this map prioritize Indigenous presence. For example, for Indigenous people, watersheds and heights of land are significant markers. As well, the labeling of land is Anishinaabe over Algonquin Park in the top right-hand side, also showing the water systems and which way they flow. It supersedes colonial boundaries and colonial understandings of land. Here, Brackley, who's a non-Indigenous cartographer, steps into his responsibilities as a non-Indigenous ally to demonstrate both his relationship with understanding the land, as he has been in the Algonquin Park region for all of his life, but also his relationship and responsibilities to the Indigenous people who continue to be here. The fact that he reached out to work with someone to help figure out what might Indigenous ways of understanding this land look like, and how can we present it to visitors to Algonquin Park. So when you look at these maps and other cartographies that honor Indigenous presence, I encourage you to consider, how do these maps change our understandings of this land and this history? Is there more that you have a responsibility to know? And also, how does it help us to understand some of the stories that the land holds? So as an Anishinaabe, I refuse to uphold Algonquin Park as a wilderness system that was predicated on the impossibility of my own existence. Instead, my relationship with my ancestral place is entirely political, as my political governance structure is directly related to my role as a member of the Crane Clan. By being here and sharing this story, I am reasserting myself and my family back into land that we were removed from. The imaginary boundaries that have been created with the designation of a provincial park do not delineate my ancestral territory. Instead, I look to the waters to help to delineate that land. It is to my own ancestral territory that I belong. I do not recognize the difference when I am within and outside of what that political boundary might be as Algonquin Park. There's no difference. There's not an imaginary line that's drawn through the forest for me. But what I do know when I am in what is now known as Algonquin Park, I can identify it as something that pushed us out of our ancestral territory. So we know that our knowledge and our ceremony as Indigenous people, that it comes from the land. Our relations are with the land, and still being in the place where I'm very much from, it centers me and guides me through the work that I do. As an Algonquin person, I'm learning to center myself within my ancestral knowledge, and my worldview is continuously tested against the colonial frame. But I know that we are seeds that our ancestors planted so long ago. We are the reason that they wrote petitions to the crown, that they tried to make sure that land was set aside for us under a changing colonial system. They kept ceremony in secret. We are still part of our creation stories, and we know that we are still part of this land. And as such, we continue to uphold our responsibilities to all of our relations. So I would argue that Indigenous cartographies help us to tell our stories. Chimigwich, thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Christine, for demonstrating so clearly the irresolute power of the map and of conservation as well. So let's move to our last speaker for this last panel. Professor Vicente Diaz, it's your time.
Michael, can I ask if you can see my screen?
Yes, we see your screen very well.
Wonderful. Let's hope the audio works as well. Kasalalia Michael, John Habade, Guangxi Vicente Diaz, Ite Vince, Anpanene, Ponpre Koken Kaus, and Palkalo Nanwen Kichi. What I want to do is offer a perspective on digital mapping from the vantage point of outrigger canoe culture and voyaging in the Micronesian region, but also as Micronesians are to be found in the diaspora, in a specific case in rural Minnesota, in Dakota homelands. This is a perspective that also involves excursions into digital space, specifically virtual reality, augmented reality, and mixed reality. And I wanted to thank my two other panelists because I love the work that you were presenting, and I think you and our audience will see a strong common thread across these presentations. So I'm not a map maker, but I come from a region whose indigenous peoples' realities of self and place are best mapped by recognizing and keeping a pace with what I want to call their multi-sensoried and multidimensional and multi-scaled instrumentalization of time, space, and what matters. I'm coming from the instrumentalization of time, space that has these characteristics of multidimensionality and multi-scalar multidimensionality, and that is also multi-sensoried and fully embodied, involves traditional outrigger canoe carving and especially long-distance open ocean voyaging capabilities and capacities in the Central Carolinian region, in the Micronesian island region. And I'll locate that in a conventional map in a moment. More specifically, I'm working from 30 years of working and being what anthropologists call a fictive kinship with the Fanur school from in two canoe houses, Ut Wenamai and Ut Wenapuku, from atoll, the Polowat Atoll in Chuuk State and Federated States of Micronesia. But I'm also talking about developing this work in relation to Chukis from Romanum Island in the Chuuk Lagoon, also from the Federated States of Micronesia, as they find themselves beached, so to speak, in Upper and Lower Sioux communities, between these communities in West Central Minnesota. There's two sort of key terms that drive this analysis. The first is indigeneity, and this is a nod to those of you who don't know anything about Indigenous studies, or especially critical Indigenous studies, as an academic field. So indigeneity refers to the claims and conditions of Aboriginal belonging to place and their analytical and political and cultural possibilities, best expressed through Indigenous vernaculars or languages and vernacular practices, like in my case, canoe building, but we could also be talking about tattoo or beading or stuff like this. I take it that what we're trying to do is move towards making mapping consistent as a vernacular practice. The second one is radical relationalities, as we call it in critical Indigenous studies. And this is the relations of kinship and reciprocal caregiving that define human personhood and peoplehood in relation to other than human persons and place. The key takeaways are considerations of indigenous peoplehood cannot be disconnected from their relations with other than human beings, including so-called inanimate objects, rocks, boulders, for me, canoes, and from the interrelatedness of land, water, sky, understood as ancestral and yet to come kin. In the Pacific, we have a saying, the canoe is the people is the canoe. And in the Pacific, you cannot talk about land without talking about water. You can't talk about land and water without talking about sky. And you cannot talk about people without talking about land, water, and sky. And the canoe embodies and deploys all of those above. The intellectual and academic project of mapping, therefore, cannot be detached from these relationalities. And cartography and map making in settler colonial societies seriously need to decolonize in terms of radical indigenous relationalities. I'm having problems shifting my slides, so bear with me. I want to illustrate these radical relationalities in Micronesia and in Dakota very quickly. In the Marshall Islands, for example, the word for island is Ailung, and it's not a mispronunciation of island, but an indigenous term. I means currents, and lang means sky. This is the definition of an island. And currents begin from the ocean floor and go all the way up to the surface of the water. But at the surface, waves and swells, but it also goes further up to winds and clouds, all the way up to the movement of stars. That's what it involves as currents. And if you don't get the picture, the second part of the word lang means sky. That's our island. Contrast that to insular and insulating and patronizing and just wrong definitions of islands in Western discourse. The second one from Dakota cosmology, political theory, culture, art, science is the Kapemni. The Kapemni is this basically this idea that all that is to be found that exists on this earthly plane is reflected in the sky, and all that is in the sky is reflected on earth. And it's also understood or visualized as a twisting of a plane that gives you this X, but it's really a mirror symmetrical inversion of what's above and below. This is most famously built into the image of the teepee, and it's an iconography that's found across Lakota, Dakota, Nakota artwork. I want to show three maps. One of the critical points I want to say is two-dimensional maps are not up to task for these things. And while three-dimensional maps begin to help, they must be augmented, so to speak, by purposeful and ethical relationship to indigenous people who define their sense of self and place according to the terms I just discussed. The limits of two-dimensionality can easily be seen in the way that the following three maps map indigeneity in the Pacific. And I'll do this really quickly. The first one is a very tired and colonial compartmentalizing of the Pacific. First of all, as hemmed in by continents, but mostly compartmentalized into three niches: Micronesia, Melanesia, Polynesia, and Australia, Australasia. I don't have time to get into the problems with this typography, but it's not hard to show that they derive from white supremacy, racial discourses associated with Enlightenment thinking and desires and anxiety. The second one, a little better, is what Pacific scholars still tend to use. This is the Pacific, but mapped not in terms of the three niches, but in terms of nation states and the different kinds of political entities. Of course, the limitation here is still the bracketing, even if it's centered on the page, but the bracketing of indigeneity in terms of statism. One of my favorite two-dimensional maps is one that traces the coincidence of outrigger canoe technology and Austronesian languages. And here you see the map becomes expanded tremendously. You need to appreciate how big the Pacific Ocean region is. Just simply know that you can combine all the Earth's land masses and bodies of water, the other oceans, the Great Lakes, the big rivers, and still the Pacific Ocean region alone is larger than that. My part of the Pacific, Micronesia, about 2/3 of Micronesia is almost double the size of the continental United States. But this one, so this is the coincidence of outrigger canoe technology, canoes with outrigger floats on one side and the ability to sail long distances. Outrigger building, sailing people are Austronesian based languages people. We're a maritime people. We spread out and settled all habitable places across Oceania. Strong evidence that we reached the Americas about the time of the Vikings, but we also moved in the other direction. And so we have kin and language and canoe cousins all the way in Madagascar and pockets in East Africa and coastal South Asia, where you find Austronesian-based languages and canoes with outriggers. And here are some even better representations, but more specifically in relation to how to map Pacific indigeneity in the diaspora. I worked with students in a project, graduate students in the School of Art and Design and Architecture, and we gave them a challenge, given a robust community of Micronesians in Dakota homelands that are working together to build canoes. We gave them the challenge: how would you design a traditional Micronesian canoe house that honors Dakota land, waters, and skies? And these are what the students came up with. I don't have the time to go through this, and I can send this to anybody, but there's actually more stuff that I want to get to. The project of building canoes with together Dakota and outrigger canoes in rural Minnesota today also works hand in hand with a collaboration among Native Studies scholars like myself and others across the campus, and art and design researchers and computer engineers in the area of augmented reality, mixed reality, and virtual reality. And I want to show some quick examples. Here is a hot mapped 3D canoe that I don't know why it's not, maybe that will work. Great. Can you guys see that?
Yes.
Okay, so this is an outrigger canoe from Micronesia. You press any one of these buttons and information will pop up. The key thing that I wanted to say here is this virtual object can also serve as a map insofar as the canoe different parts also are mapped in terms of body parts. There are parts that signify the man and the woman, as well as penises and vaginas. There are eyes, ears, there's all kinds of organs here. The canoe itself glosses as a vessel, like the blood vessels in your body. There are faces. There's all kinds of things happening here, all kinds of genders. In one moment, the canoe is androgynous, and another, there's all kinds of things happening that is suggestive for these relationalities. The relationalities here, of course, I already mentioned that the canoe is the people is the canoe. An observant ethnographer noted that in steering these canoes, if you watch the person steering the canoe, which involves having one foot in the water with a steering paddle, he said, and I quote, "One does not know where the ocean begins and the human body, where the ocean ends and the human body begins." Of course, in the making of the canoe, from the moment of felling a tree to the first cut in carving the canoe, there are protocols and prayers to transfer the mana or the manama, the life force of the tree into the canoe. So the canoe is also a sentient being. Augmenting a virtual image of the canoe allows us to bring in not only the other multiple dimensions, but illustrate the embodied elements. I want to shift. Let me stop this. I'll stop this and move to the next image, if it'll not. So that augmentation, 3D simulations files is only part of an effort to develop virtual voyaging. So we have the ability to put on the goggles, get on that canoe, that same canoe, and put into virtual environments and take a virtual sail. Here's a woman in a moment where she forgets she's in virtual space and trying to reach for the ocean. And in this video, in this video to the right, one of my colleagues is.
Remember, you have to keep your outrigger on the windward side. So
I'm talking to her, but it's not only visual; it's embodied too. So. You're also turning the canoe by that steering paddle, and you're also pulling the line to bring the sail in. When you pull the line physically and kinetically, the canoe starts to move forward, and you steer it with the hand paddle that you're also controlling. This is data-driven landscapes and seascapes in the Chuk Lagoon, and the night sky. So we're able to
actually turn the canoe.
We're able to simulate voyages in virtual reality. I'll skip a video of this to give you a sense of what you're seeing. Here you can also learn how to use the rising and setting stars for steering to different places. I want to now turn to a project that is now involved in the process of, involves pedagogies in the process of teaching how stars are used for navigation. This is called Pafu, naming and counting stars. Basically, you lay out a map with pebbles or shells in a circle, and the right side of the circle, if you break it up in two hemispheres, the right side is the eastern horizon, where stars rise and set like the sun and moon. These shells represent points of rising of different constellations. And their counterparts to the left that would make a full circle are their setting points in the western horizon. This is what kids learn to begin to learn which stars are used for navigational purposes, for directional purpose. I want to point out that the system has been consistently and woefully and problematically misconstrued as a star compass. This is not about cardinal directionality. It is about the relationship between positionality and directionality as it's guided by the rising and setting stars. So here's one of the Pafu maps that we're using, and we've augmented this with in this case we have the ability to pull up images with your goggles, but because this was developed for an exhibit, an art exhibit, we had to deal with a room, and so we chose to project, augment this by projecting other dimensions and scales upon the Pafu mat, and I want to show you. I'm going to play a video that shows what is projected on the mat itself as the stars begin to. This projection represents one day, a cycle from sun up to sundown, and then the night sky as the stars appear. This is data driven, so this is accurate. It gives you the effect that the stars are rising where they should. At this time, as we're talking, no, we're not synchronous right now. So this is just a video. When I play this video, imagine that the canoe, that model canoe, is in the middle. The center is the vantage point, your positionality. It's a canoe, it's you, or it's an island, and the stars are rising and setting around you. So, can you see that? Hello, is there someone who can?
Yes, we see.
Yes, we do. Yes.
So you see the video going? As stars rise, we identify rise in the east or the right side. We identify them. You see the constellations rising. This is the course of a night after sunset. Now sun rises. Just imagine that canoe there is going to start getting light. And one of the things you're going to start seeing is a swell from the east associated with the rising altair. If you can still imagine the canoe in the middle, you're looking at the shadow caused by the sun. And as the sun is traveling above you, you have the shadow, you're seeing the light upon the wave, the swell. And as the sun sets over and then starts its descent, the shadow gets longer. The light from on the face of the swell becomes lighter. These are actually things that navigators are feeling and seeing during the daytime when they don't see the skies. And once that starts to set, the stars will start rising again where they left off. This is an augmented Pafu mat. I want to come back and read the didactic, the signage for this exhibit. I'm really proud. We have an Ojibwe graduate student in computer engineering and Dakota graduate student in engineering who are involved in this. This was what they wrote as a result of learning about Pafu and Carolinian voyaging and augmenting it. Augmented Pafu, augmented adjective to complement and expand upon. At the center of the traditional Pafu map from Polowat is a voyaging canoe, which we augment with projected rays of light to represent the cycle of one Polowat day to capture multiple perspectives and scales. knowledge, noun, what and how we know to be true. One perspective is of a celestial simulation that is anchored to the shells that traditionally represent rising and setting stars and their trek across the sky. Though we see what a navigator sees when they sit on a canoe and look up, the projection falls instead on the mat below. As the sun rises, stars morph into waves, the waters of Chuk Lagoon. This perspective is also of a bird overhead or further from outer space from the vantage point of stars. But it is also the vantage point when you think about the canoe. When you look at the shadows, you don't know if you're looking at it from above or below, actually. That's not entirely correct because of the light, but you get the point. It's also a view of the fish and other marine beings from beneath the canoe. Reality, noun, keeping things real. The augmented Pafu map adds a second person perspective to that of time. If you, the audience member, circles around the map, you will see yet another projection of a swell, a swell that comes from the 10-mile uprising. As the sun sets and the stars rise, the sail's shadow lengthens and disappears, for we also aspire for the effect of the real, the indigenous real. Augmented reality, noun, and you can put your thoughts here as a result of how you feel. But so we want this interactive as well. Projection as a mixed reality medium invites us to meditate on our relationship to place by presenting reality through multiple perspectives and different scales. Augmented engineering with ancient indigenous knowledge allows us to ponder how rootedness in place and routedness through mobility inform ways of knowing through distinct worldviews. Wisdom, seeking good by innovating on time-honored knowledge. I want to say I'm especially happy with this didactic, because if you want to know how it is that computer engineers can use that kind of language, first of all, they have their indigenous heritage and lineage to draw from, both Ojibwe and Dakota. And secondly, they took my graduate seminar in critical indigenous theory. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vicente, for this also a very interesting and stimulating presentation of the potential of augmented reality and the relationship between the people and the sea and the canoes. We do have time for questions in this last panel. So if you have questions, please put them in the Q&A. Meanwhile, I can start with a question, maybe for all the panelists, but maybe starting with Christine, about the political instrumentation or mobilization of the native land project. I'm curious to know if you've been keeping track of the way it's been used in different political environments, and if this is something that you plan to push. I mean, I assume it's there, but like if you could talk a bit about that. And I think it could be also the case for the Manitowabi Island project. Like, is there any political potential of that project in the future?
I'll start by saying that we, first, Indigenous cartographies are inherently political, so I do not deny that we are a political entity, but we as an organization do not necessarily serve for political purposes, right? That's not what we're there for, but rather we keep our boundaries and the shapes of boundaries and so on a little bit obscure, because it does not actually show political boundaries, but rather approximate boundaries. And so that's why it comes up in that disclaimer. As we are an open source platform, free for anyone to use, we invite people to use the data that we represent, but we though we don't keep track of every single person who uses it and for every single purpose, we do, like we are very strict about making sure that that information is dealt with the utmost respect for Indigenous knowledges. So that being said, we do know a few different partners and we're involved in a number of collaborations. So I have an idea, but really, ultimately, I am happy to support Indigenous communities and nations in whatever way. And if that ends up being something political, or if there's a need for us to support political endeavors, we're here for it.
Thank you. I don't know if Josh, you want to speak on that question, which is maybe, I don't know if you're.
Can you repeat the question?
I was curious to hear about like the potential political mobilization of the work you're doing on the Manitowabi Island.
Oh, okay. Yeah, well, actually, my First Nation, Wakwamacong First Nation, they've been having an ongoing land claim since 1973. And just in land claims in general, you know, there's certain sources, I guess, the government acknowledges as valid sources in land claim court cases. And I'm just, you know, curious, like how the power of maps, counter mapping or de-colonial mapping could enhance the, you know, First Nations, their claims. Because going back to, you know, we could learn a lot from these colonial maps by, if we look at utilizing our language, the Anishinaabe language or Indigenous languages, and connecting it to oral stories, oral history, and even from the presentation we just seen, even stories of the constellations and the cosmos as well, because everything is connected. So I think these types of, you know, these types of sources, this type of research could add some validity to the land claim process in Canada.
Thank you. There's a few comments coming in to congratulate the amazing panel. So yes, we should take like a few seconds to thank you for those very impressive presentations. There's also a question that came from, there were some comments earlier. One comment from Ruderman about the beautiful choreography of the village and to hear the voices at the time of floating. And she makes reference to a video from Rosie Sima's work. So that's when, Josh, you were speaking. And then there's a question from Lori about the potential of the augmented reality for tourism. And so that's maybe a question more geared toward Vincent.
Can that be repeated?
The potential of the augmented reality for tourism.
Okay. I haven't thought of that. There's a lot of potential for using augmented reality. So augmented reality, if you guys don't know, is the augmenting of reality. The reality as you know it, augmented by one of the most popular applications is QR codes that are embedded around you that a smart device can read, like those barcodes in products, consumer products. But the more fun ones is when a 3D holographic image pops up, and these can be animated. So it could be just a link to a website or some information, or a holograph pop up. And these can take, they can be small or large. I'm not in the business of the visitor industry, and so I'm sure there's all kinds of things that can be done there. Did I understand the question right? Tourist industry?
Yes, tourism.
Okay, so I don't spend a lot of my time doing that kind of stuff. Where it serves Indigenous people, I'll be happy to help, think about that, if that can translate to funds for the research projects I do, and if it advances the needs of the local community that's in question. Where it hurts it, I think we can do all kinds of things with augmented reality to counter either the narratives or the signage or the objects that you're dealing with counter messages. So how it could play with tourist industry depends on whether that industry is doing good or bad.
There's a comment comment from Tanya Wolfram. Chiara Vicente, great presentation and exciting VR work. Will you be publishing it on Steam so that anyone can access it?
You can access the VR. Oh, are you talking about the hot mapped one? I put a link up there already, but yes. So we're still developing this, Tanya. We're not as advanced as you guys, but I don't have a link to it yet. I'm playing with a publication that might have digital links, so an e-magazine or something. I did put a link to an article about this project that does have that can give you a little more information. I also posted it there. It doesn't have the video streaming, but if you have a place where we can do that, because I know you're also building the capacity for networking with other Indigenous new media people. And of course, Tanya, that I love the work that you guys are doing and I want to be involved. Then let's take it further.
Thank you. We still have a couple of minutes. I don't know if Josh or Christine or even you, Vicente, want to say a last word or ask a question to the other panelists.
No, you guys, to Josh and Christine, I'm at American Indian Studies at University of Minnesota. Look up our website and I'll be happy to talk shop with you guys, and Indigenous mapping that takes very seriously indigeneity and Indigenous relationalities is the way to go. But I'm biased.
Thank you, Vincent. I actually had a quick question for you.
Yeah.
So I was very interested in the slide you had projected about the Lakota, the X.
Yeah.
Where do you have? Is there any way that is there any articles on that I could cite?
Yeah, there's I think it's Goodman. There's a book on Dakota star knowledge and theology. If you send me an email, I'll put my email up.
Okay.
I'll be happy to send you references that we're using, but really where we're really going is with the collaboration. I work closely with Jim Rock, who is a Dakota cultural worker and astronomer and mathematician who heads the planetarium at Duluth, UMN
Yeah.
Duluth.
Yeah.
And so he's awesome.
Thank you.
He's the star man.
Thank you. I'll reach out to you via email.
Right on.
Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. We do have one comment and then one question, and maybe we'll end up with those. Thank you all from Jared in the chat. Thank you all for excellent informative talks. The North Atlantic House in Odense, Denmark, had an amazing augmented reality exhibit on Greenland using this technology, one of the best I've ever seen, and highly informative from a visual perspective. It was amazing what could be conveyed without words. So that's a reference. And then the last question for this last panel from Catherine Bellamy. For Christine, may I ask how temporal information is taken into account for decisions about boundaries on nativeland.ca? I'm thinking about especially of communities who have been forcibly displaced and could potentially identify with more than one homeland. Many thanks again.
Thank you for the question, Catherine. So oftentimes there are very sensitive discussions that need to take place, potentially, like particularly around boundaries and overlapping boundaries and belonging. And so every single instance where we run into this question, we deal with on a case-by-case basis and with involvement of community. And then two, we also do have elders who join us when they are able to guide us through some of these more sensitive conversations. Ultimately, you know, as an Indigenous-led organization, we are extremely sensitive to any connotations related to inclusion or exclusion from the map. So again, case-by-case basis, but it's dealt with a lot of sensitivity.
Thank you very much, and I think we can end on those words. Thank you again to the three panelists and to all the panelists, and I'm gonna let Kathy and Salim wrap up the conference.
Thank you all once again, especially to our speakers and our wonderful moderator, Sebastian. Thank you so much. There was obviously a lot of overlap in both of the panels that we had today, and then that can also connect back to on the other 2 days. So in that sense, I think that we've had a lot of through lines, and it's just been absolutely phenomenal to hear everyone share their research, share interesting thoughts about their families, their peoples, and their communities. And we really sincerely thank you for sharing what can be very sensitive information. We're very grateful. Thank you also to the audience for attending the conference. This conference has been a labor of love and of interest, but also one of urgency. This topic and the maps being made by Indigenous communities around the world are the preserving histories, they're teaching culture, and they're helping to fight for land back, for sovereignty, and for rights. They are also important tools in the struggle to save the world from the effects of climate change. We've had an array of spectacular papers from around the world. So thank you for joining us on that journey, and thank you to our speakers and our moderators for guiding us. We would also like to reward your persistence with a special announcement that just got solidified actually while the panels were happening. As a scholar of Pacific history, I'm a little bit starstruck and ridiculously excited about this, so you'll have to excuse me. But we're going to be having a follow-up event from this conference that will take place on November 18th at 3 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, or Pacific Time. I might not be daylight, so don't quote me on that. We are extremely proud and excited to welcome Nainoa Thompson, Master Navigator of Hokulea and the Polynesian Voyaging Society. He will share the story of the Renaissance, the preservation, and the teaching of Polynesian voyaging practices, of the formation of the Polynesian Voyaging Society, and of the voyages that are still to come. So we're very excited about that event, and we hope that you can join us for it on November 18th. Salim?
Thank you, Katie. I want to add my thanks for all of you who were able to attend this conference. Indigenous mapping as a topic as well it's well past time to shine a light on, and we, namely my co-organizer Katie and I, made a deliberate choice to bring together scholars and practitioners to eliminate an area of mapping that was sorely needed. The honor and privilege of having the speakers that shared their work is all ours, and for that we are infinitely grateful. This work will carry on, and the center will share videos of the conference, and they will ultimately end up in the Stanford Digital Repository and findable through Stanford's catalog, which is called SearchWorks. The exhibition curated by the speakers will remain on Stanford Library's exhibition showcase at exhibits.stanford.edu/BLRCC3, along with the other Ruderman conferences. You can find them at exhibits.stanford.edu/. As Katie mentioned earlier, you are the first audience to hear this Nainoa Thompson's talk announcement, which will happen on November 18th at 3 p.m. as we continue to keep the spotlight on Indigenous mapping. Those who registered will get a link to register for that, and it'll go out in the newsletter. This event is a co-sponsored event with support from the David Ramsey Map Center, of course, Barry Lawrence Ruderman, the Native American Cultural Center here at Stanford, as well as the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Office of the School of the Earth, Energy, and Environmental Sciences. So please save that date and time to attend Nainoa Thompson's talk. So I want to move on to something really essential. I want to take this opportunity to thank a number of people who have made this conference possible. I'm grateful to Karen Beesman, who is the Associate Dean and Director of the Native American Cultural Center, or NAC, and her colleague, Denny Woodward, who is the Assistant Dean and Associate Director of NAC, for working with us to provide guidance on properly acknowledging the land, particularly the video they shared with us, and for Karen to speak at the start of the conference. To Barry Lawrence Ruderman, a huge thanks for his support for this conference. As in the past Ruderman conferences, it bears repeating that we are very grateful to Barry Lawrence Ruderman as sole financial sponsor of this conference. He's been a partner to the center well before the center was open, as I mentioned in the beginning, with this digital donation of maps. I want to thank Mike Keller, our university librarian, for his support of the David Ramsey Map Center and all of its programming, including this one. We are also extremely grateful for the continued involvement, guidance, and support of David Ramsey and Abby Smith Ramsey. David and Abby were committed to the center well before it opened, way back in 2008, and that holds true even today. In fact, David and I spoke yesterday about what's coming next. He remains involved and committed in a myriad of ways, as does Abby Smith Ramsey. Our thanks to Julie Sweetkind-Singer, Associate University Librarian for Science and Engineering, and the head of the Brand Earth Sciences Library and Map Collections, for giving me and my immediate colleagues at the center the independence to flourish and the guidance when needed. To our speakers who worked with us and contributed to this groundbreaking effort, we, the Academy, and most definitely cartographers, are very much in your debt. So thank you for that. Now on to our moderators. Yes, this is a long list, so bear with me. Alberto Queiroz Diaz, he has several titles at Stanford, senior fellow, professor among them, including but not solely the director for the Center for Latin American Studies and one who teaches several classes at the center. Thank you so much for stepping up and doing many sessions, in fact, as is our next moderator that I want to recognize, Polita Roy. She is the associate professor in the art department at the University of Arkansas, and she was a speaker at the center in the last year, where she talked about her own book on mapping, Indigenous mapping. Thank you so very much for being willing to take this on. We very much appreciate it. Also, thanks to Sebastian Gacard, who is the Associate Professor and Graduate Program Director of Geography at Concordia University, our moderator for our last panel. You just saw him. That just concluded. Thank you. As I move on down, now to Katie Parker from across the pond, my partner in crime and mischief as far as these conferences go. Katie did much of the connecting with speakers and thought deeply about the contours of this conference. Katie, it's always a pleasure to work with you, and clearly the Atlantic Ocean is no barrier. I'm already looking forward to the next conference, so this is great. There have been a very important group of people working tirelessly behind the scenes And I definitely want to recognize them for their tireless work and dedication. And I think I'm going to have Guadalupe help me with this. Tyler Mitchell, if you could show up in the spotlight. He's our Center Services Supervisor. He corralled the curators for their exhibitions and installed the physical exhibition that is available for viewing starting next Monday at the center. Right now it's for Stanford affiliates only. All of us helped, but he led the effort. Tyler has also been working very much behind the scenes on the logistics of putting together an online-only conference. So thank you, Tyler. Laura Kruger, our cartographic metadata librarian, she created the digital exhibition that has been shared throughout the conference, as well as superb work doing the graphics for the poster for the physical exhibition. Thank you, Laura. To bring Kramer, who assisted us in a myriad of ways, staffing the reference desk while we were working on the conference, creating backing for maps, a very willing plant in the audience with all 3 days, so she can provide us feedback as an attendee. Invaluable. Thank you. Katie, Tyler, Laura, and Bryn, this core group who put the conference together. You're a dynamic team, and I consider myself very lucky to be able to work with you so closely. Thank you. Next is Guadalupe Contreras. She is the person doing technical assistance throughout the conference. Your help was invaluable. She was the one who brought in speakers in and out as needed, among a few other tasks. Thank you, Guadalupe. I want to mention my thanks to Christina Konjevic. She's the Administrative Associate for the Science and Engineering Group, which the Center is a part of. She will help us with getting the honorariums to the speakers. So that's coming, and I thank her in advance for that. Last, but certainly not the least, our closed captioners, Catherine Zeich, Adela Ashley, Matthew Cole, Carolyn Cipolla, and Barry Wolfman. I think Barry is our last one here today. So he must be, he's here live. Thank you for doing a wonderful job in spite of not having advanced glossary of terms. The conference team thanks you. It's much appreciated. And with that, thank you all for coming and for your contributions. Have a wonderful weekend and see you at the next Rumsey Map Center event, which is, continuance of this conference, really, the Indigenous mapping with Nainoa Thompson on November 18th. Thank you again. Take care.
Thank you, and thank you to Salim. Bye, everyone. Have a great night, morning, and afternoon.
Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.